I do want to introduce our next speaker, Chris Mulligan. Chris Mulligan is the founder and director of Cyber Addiction Recovery Center in West LA. He's a licensed clinical social worker with 25 years of experience working with children, teens, and adults in a wide array of psychiatric conditions. He has worked in multiple settings, including therapeutic day schools, residential treatment centers, and the nonprofit and for-profit mental health clinics. He is also an adjunct professor at USC Graduate School of Social Work, where he teaches clinical methodologies and child and adult psychopathology. Chris Mulligan specializes in the use of cognitive behavioral therapy, family therapy, and he facilitates innovative interventions for children, teens, and adults with mood and anxiety disorders, as well as a number of other disorders and addictions. It is my pleasure to introduce Chris Mulligan.
You know, I just was reflecting, I was in class of 77 at Crossroads. On my yearbook page was a Confederate flag and a handgun. Because I liked Leonard Skinner. Thank God there wasn't social media back then. But it was just like a collage of stuff, and today it'd be a disaster. It's really terrible. So I'm going to present a slightly different take on the internet. As a mental health professional, I'm really interested in mental health and the internet. I see a lot of failure to launch. Young adults or tweeners, 19, 20, kids that went to college and couldn't make it because of technology-related problems. So my perspective is to look at what is going on from a broader mental health interest. So the issue that is often brought up is video games and violent video games and predators, and these are important topics and considerations, but what is more interesting to me or more important is the broader effect of all of this stimulation that comes through phones and computers and how that affects developing teens and children as well. So there's this massive unfiltered amount of stimulation coming in, and we tend to get focused on gaming, we tend to get focused on the problem predators and kind of miss the larger picture of what's going on. So, as we all know, this is here to stay. Teens use the net for all kinds of things, many of them really constructive and helpful, from political organizations, and art and communication. And so, by and large, the net is an amazing place with amazing opportunities. And many kids figure this out, kind of this online-offline balance, and they seem to do it intuitively and without a lot of supervision, and they really are good at it. And so there's about 10% who are not good at it, who really have a hard time with this offline-online balance. And that's really the theme, is kids that figure out how to do both, because they're just not that. Kids are not going to not use the internet or gaming or whatever they're doing. So we have this approximately 10% that are really vulnerable. And so the issue is sort of bi-directional with this, which is, it seems, I'll talk about this more in depth, that kids that have mental health problems or developmental disorders are more vulnerable to having this offline-online balance problem. And kids that spend a lot of time on the internet seem to be more affected by the internet, and it may in fact produce mental health problems. So it's sort of a bi-directional arrow that some people are still trying to figure it out. The addiction debate goes on. It's a hot topic. If you ever want to make sure your kids just stop listening to you, say you're an addict, gaming addict, phone addict, it just shuts it down. So it's not a particularly useful topic, especially with teens and young adults. So it's better to use terms like technology overuse, or I think you have an issue with balancing your offline-online problem. Addiction is a real hot button, and it just gets kids dug in quickly. However, the kids that I see that do have problems exhibit all the major categories of addiction. So, cravings and preoccupation, they can't stop thinking about it, they want it all the time. They develop tolerance, so that what used to be 1 hour, 2 hours, turns into 5 hours, turns into 8 hours, turns into 10 hours. Withdrawal symptoms, I've never seen anything like it from a mental health perspective, where kids are offline for 5 minutes and are dysregulated completely, or 2 minutes, anger, agitated, irritable immediately. So it's a real dynamic for some kids. And then persistent withdrawal symptoms, and then persistent behavior, negative consequences, which means their grades are failing, they're not seeing their friends anymore, it's a train wreck, and they just keep going and going and going. So these are all the same criteria used for any other addiction, alcohol or substance abuse or behavioral addictions like gambling or sex addiction. So the slide sort of comes from my take on where the problems lie with overuse of the internet and adolescent mental health. So the top is self-awareness, empathy, resilience, initiative, deliberation, collaboration. These are terms that you just don't hear when people are talking about the problems with video gaming or internet use or phones, is that these soft skills, these things that we really rely on and depend on, are affected by just this compulsive, constant absorption in media. You just don't get a chance to develop these kinds of soft skills when you're plugged in all the time. And the average time now, the New York Times has been following research on this, is about 11 and a half hours of screen time for an average teen. And that factors in all the time they're on phones, at school, at home, so they're on screens more than they're awake. They're awake, even when they're asleep, but they're getting to the point where they stop at sort of the baseline sort of went so high that 11 and a half hours seemed impossible to surpass, but they may have gone past it at this point. So all of you are familiar with this because it gets a lot of buzz in the news, which is this thing called the dopamine rush, which is a real thing. So screen interaction, even email, like that old school email, text messaging, searching on the internet, YouTube, Instagram, all triggers dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain that produces pleasure. And loss of dopamine feels really, really good. And you get it from eating, you get it from sexual behavior, you get it from novelty-seeking behaviors. It's just something that is just part of who we are. So the technology is a dopamine increasing machine. And that's where kids really get hooked. So high levels of dopamine, high levels of pleasure that can reach even states of euphoria and also focus. Stimulant medications for ADHD, for example, increase dopamine, but they do it in a way that's helpful. But kids love this, and they get locked in, and they feel good, and they feel focused. Other kids who have social anxiety are drawn to the internet. This is a sort of vulnerable group. Text-based messaging is just easier for the people that are socially anxious. It's easier to communicate via text. The downside is that the more they rely on text-based communication, the more they rely, and the more they withdraw from face-to-face communication. So it resolves some anxiety constructively, and then kids who are socially anxious tend to use it, and then that becomes their dominant way of communicating. So kids that are socially anxious, much more likely to have issues around regulating their use of the internet. So lots of studies on depression and the internet. There's studies that show that adults that are on the internet 25, 30 hours a week score much higher in depression inventories than people who are not. Again, is it depressed people that are drawn to the internet? Is it the internet produces depression? There's evidence of both, that people with depression like the internet, it makes them feel better because it's dopamine inducing, and then there's evidence that being on the internet that much is a problem for people's mood. ADHD kids love the internet. They love gaming, it's novelty seeking, it's quick, it's fast, it's focusing, and some of it is great, but they're really vulnerable, screwed, to compulsive use of the internet. So of that 10% I mentioned, social anxiety, we have depression, and then the kids with ADHD. And they're really good gamers, and they're really locked in, really competitive, and often very bright, and it just really appeals to them. But they're vulnerable to having it turn into this problem with their offline-online balance. The way I really got into this, so ASD is autism spectrum disorder, which is now what used to be called autism and Asperger's syndrome. It's all one category. So I've been running groups for kids with ASD or autism spectrum for 19 years. And around 2010, 2011, it became evident in my groups that what was happening for every kid, every weekend, was that they were gaming or on YouTube and sort of creeped in to my groups and became evident that this was a tremendously problematic area for this particular group of kids. It's the perfect solution to social anxiety. It alleviates social isolation, it provides stimulation, it cuts down on the need for social interaction. So it's a terrible combination of sort of disability and media. As I read up here, it's like truly a worst case scenario. If someone had said 15 years ago to write on a piece of paper what would be really problematic for people on the spectrum, it would be some activity where they could isolate and sort of inexhaustibly explore the world without having to interact with anybody. So part of what Ben was talking about, you'll see, is what is called the disinhibition effect. So this is something that has been studied. So why do people post things that are bigoted or homophobic or just in poor taste? Is that there's something about being invisible when you are writing something, whether you are not accountable, right, in person, that leads to bad judgment. And then when you combine also, when kids are posting and they don't know who's following them, they're sort of invisible and anonymous, and then they take terrible things. And if you've ever rage tweeted or rage emailed or sent something that was just crazy that you wonder why you did it, so one explanation is that being online creates this disinhibition, disinhibited behavior. And teens are incredibly vulnerable to this. And it includes sending, sort of crazy sexting videos and texts that they can never get back, and in the time they just are impulsive and they shoot it off. But there really is this not being seen in the moment and sending something that's inappropriate. It accounts for why would so many people send these crazy texts or posts. Some of it has to do with that they're literally invisible at the time that they send them. So online pornography if you go to my website, there's a series of videos that I've given on different topics. One of them is on online porn. Compared to video game related problems, compared to social media problems, any problems combined, online porn is by far, bar none, the biggest issue for parents to deal with. It is under the radar. People don't like to talk about it. It is pervasive. I don't know if people saw the Lisa Ling piece on CNN 2 Sundays ago. The target population when most are almost 8 to 14-year-old boys developing severe and clinically significant pornography problems. So parents that are hesitant to use filters and hesitant to really bring this up, if there's one thing you take away tonight, it's, cyber porn is really toxic. And there's no upside, and the idea that kids are just exploring, or it's kind of like dad using Playboy, or it's a little like this, it's not like that. It's just not. It distorts, it attacks what's called the arousal template, which is sort of why and how people are aroused. And repeated use of this is entirely different. We've never seen anything like it. And kids that are tech savvy can get outside the norms of online porn, like Pornhub and they can get into sex with animals and rape porn, and it's all there to be had. And it just takes a little bit of ingenuity to get to it, and then game on. Kids can sort of never recover from it. So if you don't have a porn blocker, or you've been ambivalent, or you're not checking, this is really, really important, because it's really hard to get the proverbial horse back in the barn once kids start this. It's so stimulating, and just last thing, it's sort of a combination. It's dopamine, norepinephrine, and then when kids are engaging in masturbation during this, they also produce vasopressin and testosterone. So there's actually bonding hormones and oxytocin. So they actually emotionally bond to this pornography, which is why a lot of them can't stop. I mean, it's a cocktail of neurotransmitters and hormones that's really hard for kids to cope with. Some of this, what they call narcissistic personality traits, you see on social media posts, and this is simply a sort of a fancy way of saying me too, me too, me too, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. I'm important, followers, this idea of just being loved and liked, and it's self-centered, and it's me-focused, and it can take on some really unattractive personality traits that in the mental health literature we call narcissism. You do it enough, and these kids kind of just are, and they're vain, and they're petty, and they just get lost in sort of social values that don't make any sense in terms of sort of broader sense of their integrity. Another sort of issue to be aware of is compulsive shopping and gambling. We've had 3 dozen clients, parents come in with kids that got a hold of the credit card and did crazy stuff. Some of it was video gaming, $2,500 in 2 nights, but some of it's gambling. Kids get on gambling sites, or when eBay was all the thing, or whatever they're doing now in terms of online shopping, just losing it, and getting compulsive. So I've written some material that's on my website on this particular one, is self-awareness and empathy. So these are, again, sort of the soft skill. We don't have a psychiatric diagnosis for it, obviously. But when you think of it, kids now feel something, or they think they feel something, or they think something, and before they know it, they're communicating it to a friend or texting it. And in that, they don't contemplate sort of what they're feeling and thinking. So there's an attrition of the ability just to contemplate, to sit quietly and digest your day and digest your feelings and think about it, because before they're done thinking it or feeling it, they're texting it and broadcasting it. And this erodes the sort of fundamental human ability to self-reflect. The phone is not a device for self-reflection, right? It's a device to communicate. I'm sure some of you are insane when your kids will never pick up the phone, right? But broader, big picture, a lot of these kids don't know how to talk, because they're texting. I mean, they just lost the art of sort of conversation. Again, many kids handle it, but it is, again, a concern, sort of what happens to kids that mainly can communicate through video and through text-based communication. You're just not particularly skilled at or as skilled as they could be at conversation. The loss of nonverbal communication. Now the old saying, 70% of all communication is nonverbal. So again, if your dominant form of communication is text-based and phone-based, then you just don't get to practice reading prosody, which is sort of tone of voice, posture, body position, hand gestures, all of that, is lost when kids are glued to screens. They just don't have any reason to learn how to do it. So, the fact is the majority of the teens in this room are going to handle technology well. But there are these vulnerable groups, social anxiety, ADHD, depression, autism spectrum, the four most vulnerable. And then there's sort of kids that are going to struggle. But it is a public health issue that we just don't address. The video gaming and really concerned about cyber safety, all extremely important and legitimate. But the bigger sort of public health problem of letting this unfiltered stimulation just pour into their lives is largely sort of not talked about. The media is just not a sexy, interesting topic. This is spree shooter, they immediately go to what video games they play. And then sort of there's a spike in conversation and it kind of goes away. Getting help, the way that teachers and pediatricians and therapists can sort of assess this is that the kids that are having a problem are the same kids that used to be having problems, meaning they're kids that have struggled with online-offline balance. It's just the internet is sort of the new way this is expressed. So if people know what to look for, it's not that hard to see. It's just people taking the time to ask questions during pediatric visits or a mental health visit, or teachers noticing, kids just struggling with this balance. Loss of interest in friends, loss of interest in hobbies, loss of interest in recreational activities, grades dropping. These are all sort of really clear signs that there's a problem. And there may be a mental health problem and a problem with technology consumption. So there's this term, cyber wellness, right? It's a good term, good idea. The idea is this idea of balance and using the internet in ways and technology generally that is useful and creates well-being. So cyber wellness assumes that it's here to stay, it's never going anywhere, so we need to sort of figure out how to have a positive relationship to technology. So some of this will be covered tonight in different ways. Responsible content consumption, right? That's part of cyber wellness. Responsible content production, which is what your kids produce on their phones. Whether it's a video or whether it's a blog or whether it's a post, this is part of responsible cyber wellness, is being mindful of what they produce. Awareness of cyber opportunities and risks, so you're knowing what's good and what's not good, what's risky and what's not risky. Awareness of techno overstimulation, which is this term of kids just being overstimulated by technology. Staying up too late, sleep-wake cycles getting inverted, not eating, drinking tons of caffeine, that kind of thing. Taking advantage of online opportunities while always remaining fully engaged. And some kids are brilliant at this, sort of using the internet and technology to make films and make art and engage in international political movements, and then some kids just isolate and disappear into fantasy and YouTube and other forms of sort of mindless consumption. And knowing when to unplug and plug into nature. There are many contracts, I have one on my website as well, about sort of regulating time and making sure that families spend time together and they go out that they connect. Some of this is just really common sense to make sure that your phones are down, that you're eating together, that you're exercising together, that you're exploring together, and that there's breaks from media consumption. So the website's good, just in terms of there's a lot of content that I put on there over an 8-year period of time. The videos are good, and then there's links to all kinds of other resources for mental health topics, and also sort of digital safety and contracts for cell phone use and computer use and so on. So thank you very much. It's an incredibly impressive program.